Welcome back to another episode of I Wish They Knew, a show where we share big ideas that deserve more attention in about the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. I'm Joe Hirsch. Today's wish comes from Rebecca Hinds. Rebecca founded the Work Innovation Lab at Asana and the Work AI Institute at Glean, both of which are first of their kind corporate think tanks, and they are doing some amazing work. Her research is consistently featured in top tier publications and has appeared all across the popular press. And Rebecca is the author of a great book. I really enjoyed this one. Your Best Meeting Ever: 7 Principles for Designing Meetings That Get Things Done. And yes, meetings can get things done if we get them done right. I think Rebecca's here to help us understand that a little bit more. Hey, Rebecca, it's great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe.
All right, it's a pleasure to have you along. So meetings, my goodness. What do you wish more people knew about how to get meetings right? Because God knows they go wrong.
There are so many things. I think first and foremost, I wish people knew meetings don't need to be a knee-jerk reaction to all of our problems. And I think at the core of our dysfunctional meeting culture is the notion that we use meetings by default. When we have a problem, we schedule a meeting. When we need alignment, schedule a meeting. When we're unsure on next steps, schedule a meeting. When some people haven't heard their voice enough, schedule a meeting. And it's a very dysfunctional knee-jerk reaction because we know meetings are so expensive, right? They're the only collaboration tool in our organization that requires everyone to synchronously be in a room or a virtual space together. And so the premise of Your Best Meeting Ever is meetings are the most important product in our entire organization, but they're also the least optimized.
Yeah. So too many meetings by default, not enough by design. And we've all experienced the drag of a bad meeting or too many meetings and that sense of meeting overload. But you really consider this to not just be the cause. It's really the symptom of a broken system of collaboration. What exactly are we getting wrong?
We're getting wrong intentional communication. And you're very right in the sense we often think that meetings are the problem. Usually they're a symptom of a broken collaboration system. And we saw this so clearly through the pandemic where we had more digital tools than ever before. In theory, tools that should have allowed us to spend less time in meetings. And yet we saw across every level of the organization, the time workers spend in dysfunctional meetings increase and increase. And part of that is because workers had more tools. What they didn't have was clarity in terms of where work should happen. And so when work happens in 5 different places, when you're not sure where the real work lives, where the source of truth lives, you start to need to have more meetings, or you perceive that you need more meetings to get that alignment, to move work forward, to clear up uncertainty in a way that overwhelms our calendars.
Yeah. So the tools that were supposed to speed work up just ended up spreading it out. And that just made the need for meetings compound, but it becomes sort of a downward spiral. Too many meetings and not enough clarity.
Exactly. Because again, you have this knee-jerk reaction. And even for something like a status update, a briefing, things that don't require meetings, we start to feel like meetings are the only reliable way to get everyone's attention and move work forward.
Right. So not everything has to be a meeting, but knowing what to cut and what to keep and how to design it intentionally, that can all be very challenging. You have a really neat filtering system that you talk about in the book that leaders can use, and it actually can work. Tell us about it.
Sure. So it's called the 4D CEO test, and it's essentially a 2-part test to decide whether you actually need that meeting. So first is the 4D test. A meeting should only exist if the purpose is to decide, discuss, debate, or develop yourself or your team. So things like status updates, broadcast briefings, even something like brainstorming doesn't necessarily pass that 4D test. Now, even if something does meet one of those 4Ds, it needs to pass the second test, which is the CEO test. So a meeting should only exist if it is either complex, so there's enough ambiguity, a lot of unknown unknowns where it is more efficient to get everyone together and work through that ambiguity synchronously. E, is it emotionally intense? So if it requires reading emotions, displaying emotions, interpreting emotions. Usually, you need your human empathy, you need to read body language, you need that physical face to face contact. And then O comes from Amazon. Is it a one-way door decision? Meaning, once you walk through, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to revert course. In those cases, the cost of misalignment is often too high not to get in a room for 15 minutes and ensure that everyone's on the same page. Most decisions, the vast majority, are not one-way door decisions. And this filter allows us to become much more deliberate and intentional about when we actually need a meeting.
Yeah, it really is because if you look at both parts of this system, the 4Ds and then the CEO components, it's not just designed to eliminate waste in terms of time, but also the drain on human capital, morale and engagement and all the things that inevitably tank when people feel overextended and over-indexed on their meetings. And I think that a leader who's scheduling this meeting really has to think about, does it meet these standards? Does it rise to this level of intention that's going to really make the team more clear about whether they should be meeting in person or not?
And what I consistently find is people appreciate that. They recognize when someone has taken the deliberate action to decide, does this meeting need to exist? Or I have a meeting and I can move certain things that don't pass the 4D CEO test to be asynchronous. People respect that, whereas they tend to resent the organizer who, schedules the things that could have been an email within this very expensive meeting time.
And I imagine it probably behooves the leader or the scheduler of this meeting to make the decision making apparatus clear to everybody so that they understand exactly the decision making process and how decisions are unfolding across these different intentions, right?
And it's such a simple practice. And it's a little bit mind boggling that not every organization doesn't have something that says clearly, this is what should be a meeting. This is, passing this test, passing this rule. That's what justifies a meeting on a calendar. And often you'll go into organizations and it's a good test for folks, ask 5 different employees in your organization what deserves to be a meeting in our organization. You shouldn't get 5 different answers. You should get one across.
Yeah. So it's almost like you're making the standards of intention clear and you're clearly communicating those standards to your team.
And Joe, the thing is, remote first companies tend to do this much, much better than predominantly in office environments because they need to, right? Communication, they live and die by the strength of their communication channels. And so we tend to see this documentation, this explicit outlining of communication tools and their purpose and norms in those remote first environments.
So the part that I found really interesting and even a little bit creepy in the book was the practice of skipping meetings altogether and sending your digital
Mhm.
twin in your place. For those of you out there who are not familiar, it's essentially a clone trained to mimic our specific data, our meeting history, our experience, even our voice and our style. It's actually quite scary when you see these in real life. So two-part question here. Do you think these digital twins work? And are they even a good idea?
So I'm mixed on this because I think there are situations where they make sense. And there are some obvious ones like I'm out on vacation, I'm on maternity leave, for example, and I want my judgment in the meeting. I have some very specific expertise that otherwise wouldn't be brought into the meeting had I not been able to send a virtual twin, a digital twin of myself. And so that's where I think it makes sense. Where I see it backfire very quickly, and there are multiple examples, of CEOs in particular boasting about sending their digital twins to meetings, not showing up themselves, because then you start to get in this territory where there's a political cost associated with that. Nothing says that your time is more valuable than someone else's if you're sending a digital twin to the meeting. And so again, it goes back to the intentionality and purpose of the meeting. if we're in that D territory where the purpose is to develop your team, as a leader, that's arguably your most important purpose within the organization. We know that people take that personally if you're not showing up yourself. Even if a digital twin is giving us objectively the information we need, there's a perception associated with it that we often don't value the response or the interaction as heavily, understandably, as a full human. And so I think time will tell in terms of what are the right purposes for these digital twins. But right now, overwhelmingly, I'm seeing this, excitement with being able to attend fewer meetings and instead send your digital twin. And very quickly you get into the territory where if everyone's sending their digital twin to meetings, that meeting shouldn't have existed in the first
Yeah.
place.
That's also a pretty good filter right there. So let's talk about what's happening during these meetings themselves. So even if we have really filtered and been intentional and scheduled this meeting for all the right reasons, the outcomes of these meetings don't always rise to those intentions. What could leaders be doing during the meeting itself to make sure that people are engaged during those meetings?
hmm So there are several different tactics, and I think first and foremost, you mentioned Stephen Rogelberg before we started recording. A mentor of mine, we've worked together on a few different meeting studies. What he's shown is there are two people that tend to leave the meeting more satisfied than the other people. First, the person who talks the most, and second, the organizer of the meeting. Right. So first and foremost, and I have a whole chapter in Your Best Meeting Ever on user-centric design. We need to be designing our meetings for the users, the attendees, just as we would the products in our organization, not ourselves as the organizer. And so I think that's, when we think about design, that's a first filter. Are you treating your attendees' time more valuable than your own? There are lots of different ways we can measure meetings as well, and increasingly using AI and analytics to understand, okay, what's the airtime composition in the room? We know that leaders tend to speak more than everyone else in the room. We also know that equal airtime is one of the strongest predictors of team performance. And so that's, can be a gauge. Whether people are multitasking in the meeting is another good one. And then asking attendees. So I recommend after about 10% of all the meetings you lead, ask people to rate on a scale of 0 to 5. Was this meeting worth the time they invested in the meeting? It's a simple gauge that will get you pretty accurate information in terms of, at least at baseline, whether this meeting deserves to be on the calendar.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many times when we meet with others, it's really about pushing information out to other people. Rarely do we actually seek to receive that feedback about the quality of the meeting itself. That is a fantastic practice that probably could instantly change the way many leaders think about the way they're setting up and running these meetings.
And it's a 30-second activity. It's usually done anonymously and it's 0 to 5 scale. You can do a follow-up question. What would it take for me as the organizer to design a meeting in a way that would boost your rating by 1 point? This comes from my colleague, Elise Keith, who I learned about this practice. It's called RODI, return on time investment, similar to ROI, return on investment in product development. We need to be taking the same discipline approach because, as we've said, meetings are so expensive. Why aren't we measuring them with the discipline we measure all of our other work practices?
Yeah, time is a resource that we just cannot get back.
hmm
The book is Your Best Meeting Ever, and this was one of the best conversations I had all day. Rebecca Hinds, thanks for sharing your wish with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe.